We're going to build the section you see on screen using both the Classic Editor and Editor 2.0. This side-by-side approach will give you a clear look at how columns behave in Editor 2.0, what's changed from the Classic experience, and how to align elements within a column. Along the way, you'll also get hands-on with the new Layers panel and pick up some useful tips and tricks to help you build more confidently in Editor 2.0. Starting in Classic, let's add a new row to our site. Next, open the row's design settings to set the row to full bleed, adjust the background color, and reduce some of the padding. Then, let's add another column. In the left column, we'll add an image widget. The final element we'll add to this column is a button. In Classic, there's just one way to align a widget within a column. When you right-click a widget, a small context menu appears. You'll notice here 3 alignment options. In this case, the image widget will need to be aligned to the left so it appears flush against the left edge of the column. Let's align the button to the right side of the column next. What did you notice about how we align these two widgets in Classic? In both cases, we apply the alignment directly to the widget itself. Editor 2.0 still supports this approach. It's one of 2 ways to align elements. Let's rebuild the same section in Editor 2.0 and take a look at the first of 2 methods for aligning widgets. Let's add a new section to the site. I'm going to apply the same styles we used earlier, but this time, you'll see we're doing it from the design panel on the right. Then let's add an image widget. Notice that under the size settings, we have more control over the image dimensions. In Classic, you can only adjust the image's width, but in Editor 2.0, you can also control the widget's height and even toggle a setting to maintain the image's proportions as you resize it. Before we look at the alignment properties for our image widget, let's add our button widget first. Now let's take a look at how we'll align these 2 elements. At the top of the design panel, just below the widget's name, you'll see a setting labeled Alignment. From here, you can set the position of the selected widget. As you can see, setting the alignment for an individual widget feels pretty similar, if not nearly identical, to the experience in Classic. Before we explore the second alignment method in Editor 2.0, we'll return to the Classic Editor to build out the rest of the section. Inside the column on the right, go ahead and add a text widget. Then, let's add an inner row. I'm going to build out the left column using a divider widget followed by a couple of text blocks. Since we're working in Classic, everything in this column will stack vertically from top to bottom by default. Instead of building out the right column from scratch, I'm just going to copy the widgets over from the left column. Now that we have this first inner row built out, let's take a look at how to create a gap between the 2 columns in Classic. In Classic, I'll need to select each column individually and apply a margin to create the space between them. Sometimes, it can be tricky to select a specific element on your page when multiple elements are stacked closely together. In Classic, one way to make this easier is to right-click on the element you want to target and choose Select Container. This lets you quickly access the column or any other container you need to target. Keep this in mind because later when we rebuild this section, in Editor 2.0, you'll see that while it doesn't have this exact feature, it offers a similar one with improved functionality. Now that we've selected the right column, Let's add some left margin to create the gap between the two columns. And rather than rebuilding another inner row with all these different elements we just added, I'm simply going to copy the existing inner row, paste it right below, and update it with new copy. Now let's switch over to Editor 2.0 and build this same section there. We'll start with something simple, adding a text widget. Next, we'll need to use something equivalent to an inner row to create the sections below. Now, here's an important difference. Inner rows are unique to Classic. Although Editor 2.0 does not use inner rows, it introduces a more flexible alternative called inner columns, which can be added from the Widgets panel. You'll notice two types of inner columns in this area. This is a vertical inner column, which means widgets added inside will be arranged from top to bottom. This vertical stacking behavior mirrors what you're familiar with in the Classic editor, where elements within a column naturally flow in a top-to-bottom order. And this is the horizontal inner column. You can think of this as similar to a row in Classic, as any widgets you place inside will line up side by side. And to recreate an inner row in Editor 2.0, we'll need to add a horizontal inner column. Next, add a vertical inner column inside the one we just added. If this setup seems a bit unfamiliar or confusing, don't worry, let's switch back to Classic for a moment to look at what we're trying to replicate. In Classic, inner rows are set to a horizontal layout and come pre-configured with two columns. In Editor 2.0, we can recreate the inner row simply by adding inner columns within inner columns. This technique of adding columns inside other columns is known as nesting. Nesting makes Editor 2.0 especially powerful because it gives you the flexibility to create more complex layouts without being limited by the structure of traditional inner rows. To build an inner row, we'll need an inner column set to a horizontal stacking direction. This element will function as the row. Then, inside that horizontal inner column, add a vertical inner column. The vertical inner column we just added will work just like a regular column in the Classic editor. It will hold and organize all the widgets you place inside, and they will be arranged from top to bottom. Remember that second method of aligning elements that I alluded to earlier? Let's take a closer look at how it works. Select the vertical inner column, then open the design panel to check out its layout settings. These settings let you control how all the widgets inside a column are aligned, so you can adjust everything at once, instead of handling the alignment of each widget individually, as we did in Classic. At first glance, you might notice that nothing seems to change when I click these buttons. That's actually because the inner column isn't tall enough yet, so the changes we're making aren't visible. Let's make the inner column a little taller so we can see the alignment settings in action. Under Layout, starting from the bottom, our stacking direction is set to vertical, so this tells us that our widgets will display from top to bottom. Next up is the vertical content alignment setting. Right now, it's set to middle, which tells the browser to center all the widgets within the column. That's why you're seeing some space or padding above and below the widgets. And finally, there's the horizontal content alignment setting. This is what's keeping all the widgets aligned to the left edge of the column. Let's change the vertical content alignment setting to space between. Notice that there is an equal amount of spacing that gets distributed between or around the widgets depending on the setting. This creates an even gap, and you don't have to manually adjust padding or margins. The editor takes care of it for you, making the design process a lot more efficient. Aligning widgets at the column level is ideal when they all share the same alignment. It lets you apply a consistent setting to everything inside at once. However, if each widget needs a different alignment, it's better to set those individually. For this inner column, I've resized it back to its original, smaller height and set the vertical content alignment to space between. Next, instead of rebuilding the column from scratch, I'm going to use the duplicate button in the floating bar. This will create a copy of the selected element, in this case, our inner column, with all the widgets and settings preserved. All I have to do now is update the text. To finish up this section, we can just duplicate the entire horizontal inner column. Can you select and duplicate this inner column? If you're having trouble selecting that inner column, you're not alone. It can be tricky. But before we dive into how to do it in Editor 2.0, let's quickly look at how we used to select nested elements in the Classic editor. If you remember from earlier, when we right-click an element in Classic, we see the option to select a different container. In Editor 2.0, the Layers icon in the upper left corner lets you select a different container. Unique to Editor 2.0, the Layers panel gives you a hierarchical view of all the site elements. From here, you can select not just a different container, but any widget on your site. Let's look for our horizontal inner column. Now that our inner column has been selected, let's duplicate it from the floating bar. I'm going to fast forward a bit here and update all the text. Now let's make a few final adjustments, starting with the size of the gap between these two inner columns. Select one of the horizontal inner columns and open the design panel. Quick side note, at the top of the design panel, you'll see a breadcrumb trail. This matches what's shown in the Layers panel and gives you another way to navigate between nested elements on the page. In the design panel, look for a setting called spacing. This is where you can adjust the gap between the columns. Editor 2.0 makes this much easier than Classic. In the Classic editor, you had to click each column separately and apply fixed pixel padding, only on certain sides, which was prone to human error. But now, with Editor 2.0, you can efficiently control the spacing for the entire container all in one place. Now, I'm going to show a little trick that will make your sites more responsive. Select one of the vertical inner columns and look at its size settings from the design panel. Notice that this has a fixed height. At the top of the design panel, under Alignment, you'll see a double-headed arrow. That's the stretch feature. By clicking this button, the inner column gets a height of 100%. This allows us to automatically resize it when we adjust the size of the horizontal inner column it's in. If that sounds a little abstract, let me quickly show you how it works. First, make sure to enable the stretch feature for all the vertical inner columns. I'm also going to make the main column a little wider so that our text doesn't look so cramped. So now, when we click on the horizontal inner columns and resize them, this ensures everything stays aligned and scales proportionally, making your layout more responsive across different screen sizes. Our design looks almost complete. To wrap up this design, let me quickly remove that extra bit of padding that surrounds the dog image on the left. And that's a wrap for this lesson. I hope this walkthrough clarified how columns and alignment work in Editor 2.0, both at the widget and column level, introduced you to the Layers panel, and shared a few practical tips to support your transition to Editor 2.0.